Tom, I suppose if we go through the figures first, you reported a very good year with record revenues.
We had a good year, Claire, yeah. Our revenues increased by 16% to almost 74 million. The predominance of that was based on an increase in gate receipts, which is always the most encouraging part because that's what the thing is about. So there were about 1.5 million people attended GAA matches over the course of last year, which is the highest it's been for a couple of years, and that brought in for us a significant increase in gate receipts.
And ticket price increase, of course, across the league and championship very much fed into that.
We did. Do you remember this time last year we proposed a small package of ticket price increases, and we were quite careful at the time to try and earmark precisely what we wanted to do with those funds. A significant element was to go back to counties through gate receipts in the national leagues. A significant element was to go towards county funding for their administration purposes, and the remainder was to go directly to clubs for club development grants. And I'm pleased to say that the increases that we proposed brought in the revenues that we had targeted, and we've been able to honour to the nth degree the commitments that we made at the time.
So the association then in a very good position.
We've had a good year and we are in a good position, Claire, but I don't think, and hopefully people will get a sense of it when they read the accounts, I don't think there's any room for complacency with things. I mean, a couple of little warning signs. We have significant capital projects ahead, significant commitments that we need to make to, among others, Kildare, Waterford and Meath. Another small cautionary note, we don't expect to have any concerts in Croke Park Stadium for the summer ahead, just for reasons of availability of acts and so on. So yeah, we've had a good year. We're in a very good position, but it's not to say that we're complacent to any degree at all.
Now, you described in your report the Páirc Úi Chaoimh redevelopment as an ongoing challenge. You're putting the final figure, the final cost there at around 96 million.
The cost of the stadium, when everything washes out, would be 96 million. If you remember this time last year, we talked about projected costs and we talked about best case and worst case scenarios. We're actually not at the final end game of all of that yet. Claire, believe it or not, there's still quite a number of things to be resolved, but I'm confident that at this stage that the final cost will work out at 96 million. Which is, it's significantly above what was initially estimated, but I think the important thing for people to remember is what an asset that's going to be for the association for the next 30, 40 years and so on. So we're very proud of the facility. It does pose a challenge for Cork and for the association as a whole in terms of being able to finance the ongoing debt that will be the residue of that development, but I've no doubt at all that we'll be able to manage that.
You say it leaves an underlying debt, though, for Cork of almost 20 million. How will they cope with that? Cork
is a very, very significant and a very proud GAA county, as you know. We've had counties before that have faced similar challenges in terms of not quite the scale of debt, but proportionately would have been as problematic for smaller counties. The GAA has a great tradition and a great ethos. We pay our way, whether that's counties or whether that's clubs. I've no doubt at all that it's going to be hard work for Cork. We'll support them nationally. We'll work with them on their business plans. We'll help them with their fundraising and so on. But I've no doubt at all that Cork will be able to live up to their obligations.
It is a huge figure. Will clubs suffer?
Clubs in what?
In Cork, will the cost go back onto the clubs in some way?
Well, I suppose the most important thing to make sure of is that the games don't suffer in Cork, and it's important. Like it stands the association in good stead to have a healthy Cork GAA football and hurling terms. So the Cork County Committee are well aware of their responsibilities in that regard. So how they actually go about the specifics of funding that, I don't know. That still has to be determined, and that's first and foremost a matter for Cork. But there's nobody better at safeguarding the future of Cork GAA than Cork clubs and Cork County Board.
Does it colour very much how you approach other large projects like that? We know the Casement Parka plans are still unclear as yet.
Of course it does. Casement Park is slightly different. You'll know that's been mired in planning difficulties for the best part of 10 years now. I think and I hope we're reaching a resolution to that, and I think the fact that there's an administration in place in Northern Ireland now will help with that greatly. If the planning process concludes over the course of the next 6 months or thereafter, then there will be a piece of work to do to look at how the project can be funded, given that the original costings are now significantly out of date. But that's ahead of us for 2020.
Do you think there's been a lot of lessons learned from the Páirc Úi Chaoimh development in terms of oversight and how these projects are funded with costs escalating?
that's the nature of significant projects like that. But to be fair about it, we learn lessons from every project that we undertake. And I mentioned some of them in my report today in terms of how we go about the 3 or 4 significant projects that are ahead of us. It's not significantly different, but there are changes in nuance. I think it's fair to say that there will be more central oversight from here. I think it's fair to say as well that we will try to make sure that those projects are predicated not on future income to be earned, but are based on funds that are actually available at the time the project is started.
What do you see as the big challenges, I suppose, for the year ahead? Fixtures always there as an issue. We saw the Club Players Association pull out of your task force.
Yeah, that was a pity, but the significant work went into that, and I think we'll see the fruits of that over the course of 2020. You'll be familiar with all of the proposals that came out of that particular piece of work. The first dozen or so of those proposals will be before us at Congress here in 2 or 3 weeks' time. We'll introduce over the course of the remainder of the summer maybe another 10 or 12 by way of policy changes, but the real business end of it will be next September time, when we'll get together to look at what shape the championship will take in terms of football in particular for next year and beyond. And that's the means by which we can perhaps arrive at a very, very different fixture schedule.
What are your hopes for the new championship, the Tier 2? You're about to come up with a new name for it, I believe.
That'll be good. It'll be nice when we can stop referring to it, Claire, as Tier 2. Already a couple of proposals in the pipeline, and I expect and hope that we'll be able to announce something at Congress in 2 weeks' time. It is important, but it's secondary to a large degree. The real business, I suppose, is the playing of the competition over the course of the summertime. So I hope when we're back here together reflecting on 2020, we'll have had a positive Sam Maguire and a positive Tier 2 football championship.
Now, another interesting figure to emerge today, that the total costs across all the counties of inter-county team preparation, close to €30 million. You described it as unsustainable.
It is, it's unsustainable. And I think counties themselves would recognise it. We've spent a lot of time with the executives in county committees over the course of the last 4 to 6 months looking at this particular issue. There are a number of things that have to change. We need to change perhaps the size of county panels. We need to change we've talked about it, the calendar. I think if we had a more truncated calendar with a finite closed season, I think that would help things. And there's also a cultural thing too, in terms of just the amount of resource and the amount of expenditure that we put at the senior inter-county game versus the grassroots and the club level game within counties and nationally. I think that's a balance that we need to redress.
So what do you ask for things like backroom teams? We see, I know there's a reference in the report to not purchasing the latest in vogue skill sets. What do you want backroom teams to be cut back?
It might not necessarily mean that they need to be cut back. One thing that might work, and one thing that we're looking at, is shared resources. So, for example, is there something that we here can do to provide expertise to counties who either are not in a position to fund it, or are having to perhaps accept second best because of the constraints that apply to them. So we're looking at, yes, cutting back would be one element, but it's not the only element, Claire. We're looking at trying to look at things a little bit differently.
We obviously, the more successful counties and the wealthier counties can afford to have bigger backroom teams, so they are at that advantage. But are you in a way asking them, it has become very professional, those kind of setups? Are you asking them to row back on that?
The funny thing is, it might not necessarily be what you would call the most successful counties. It might not necessarily be the counties that emerge at the end of August, not September, with Sam and Liam. The difficulty is that at the start of every year there are probably 8 to 10 counties in each code with serious ambitions of getting towards the latter stage of the championship and winning the thing. They don't all do it. So the people that win and the people that emerge at the end, they're probably okay. It's the people that have sized their operation expecting to win and do well and don't. They're the ones that face the real difficulty. And they're the people that we need to help.
Just finally to on-field matters, we saw after the weekend's action a lot of controversies about timekeeping and this can pressure on referees and all of that, and a call to go back to introduce a clock or a hooter system.
We did. We looked at that 6 or 7 years ago, if I recall, Claire, and it's a model that is applied, as you know, in ladies football. But I think, look, we're 3 games into the National Football League, and I think any change that we're going to countenance or consider should be based on a far, far longer period than that. I wouldn't have any huge enthusiasm for doing that for the reasons that we rejected it before. I think what people have seen is actually, it's not necessarily a negative. It's referees responding to what they see on the field, and if they perceive that, you know, things are taking longer than they should, and that there's more stoppage time than they'd expect to see, they're quite right to add it on. Maybe we need to get used to games that are lasting 76, 77 minutes.
Do you think there should be more than one referee?
Looked at that as well in the past. That's a lot longer ago, maybe 15 years ago or so or more. I can remember there was a referee in each half. I think that a lot of the referee is becoming very, very difficult. But that's not necessarily because of the rules. Maybe that's because of all of us. It's because of what we expect of referees, and it's because of the way that games are carried out. Some of the things that you'll see at Congress time in 2 weeks' time will be geared at making the lot of the referees a little bit easier by maybe more closely aligning the two codes.
Do you think we'll see a black card in hurling?
That's one of the things I was referring to. I don't know. Clearly, like with any game, hurling is in a great place at the moment. It's thriving, but you don't want to make the mistake of waiting until something remiss happens before having to take remedial action. I think it's a good idea to be conscious all the time of improvements that you could make to the game. There are little elements in it of late that maybe do need to be cautioned. I think it'll be a good debate. I might be the only person in the room that won't have a vote, so I'm not going to tell you, Claire, what I think of the proposal one way or the other. Only I think it's a really, really good idea to have a debate around that, and it's a really, really good idea to take action if we think it's necessary in either code.